Welcome to another Ozarks Voices Oral History interview, a project of Missouri State University Libraries and its Ozarks Studies Institute initiative. I'm Craig Amason with University Libraries, and today's date is Wednesday, April 20th, 2022. Our special guest is Pat Johnson, who is chair of the board at the Eddie Mae Herron Center in Pocahontas, Arkansas, which is where this interview is taking place today. Thank you, Pat, so much for allowing me to be here to interview you and for participating in this project.
You're welcome. Just excited.
I'm going to start out with the hardest question of all. Can you tell us when and where you were born?
I was born in Pocahontas, Arkansas, and December the 15th, 1948.
Pocahontas.
Pocahontas.
So, were you here? Did you ever leave Pocahontas?
No,
Okay, you've lived here your whole life.
I've lived here my whole life.
Do you know how many generations your family goes back in this area or in the Ozarks region? Do you know anything about how they got here? Or?
Not really. I just know that my mother was born in Pocahontas. Well, it's a small town out from Pocahontas called Emboden.
Mm-hmm.
And my father was born here in Pocahontas also. And his family, his dad, came from Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
He was lived in Missouri. But
You know what part of Missouri?
Mammoth Springs.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mammoth Springs. And my mother, her parents was from Emboden. Now, before that, I don't really know.
Okay.
My great grandmother's birth certificate states that she was from South Carolina.
Uh-huh.
Now, I've always wondered, how she got to here.
Right.
So,
Right. Do you have any idea when they were born? When your grandparents were born?
I don't remember right
No,
now, and I
no.
should have looked
No,
that up
no,
and
it's
had
all
it, but the 1800s. I
Okay.
don't really know exactly.
Okay. But you think it was the
Exactly.
1800s?
Uh-huh.
Okay. What can you tell us about your parents? Maybe how they met, if you know that.
I don't know exactly how they met, except, in a small town, that you would always have the opportunity to get together, family gatherings, and I'm just assuming that that's how they met. My dad lived in Pocahontas, my mom lived in Emboden, so just gathering, I guess, how they got to know one another.
Mm-hmm.
But they married in Emboden
Mm-hmm.
and lived on farms
Yeah, out in the county?
out in the rural area.
Uh-huh. I was going to ask you where they lived. Where were they living when you were born?
Here in Pocahontas, as a matter of fact, just next door
Okay.
to the Eddie Mae Herron Center.
Okay. Is that house still there?
It is
Okay.
still there.
And how did they support themselves?
My father, starting off, was like he worked at a handle mill, sawmill. My mother was a, I guess, domestic worker. She worked in homes, and that's how they supported themselves and their families. Different jobs. Also, I remember my dad driving a car to transport the black children to this school.
To this school?
To this school.
Okay.
And that was a short while. And in the meantime, while he done that, he lived on a farm here in Pocahontas. It was called the Salee Farm.
Okay.
And he was the overseer of their cattle, their stock, and we lived in that area. It was called the 5 Mile Springs was the area that we lived in at that time. And then when that family sold their farm. They gave the house to my mom and dad, and they moved it here in Pocahontas and moved it to the spot where it is now.
Now, what the house that they moved, was that the house that the farm family was living in, or that your family was living in?
The farm family owned this house,
Uh-huh.
and they allowed my parents to live there.
Okay, all right. So your parents were living in that house, and then they moved that house here.
Yes,
It's not this house.
it is.
It is the house next door.
It
That's
is.
the one that was moved here.
It is.
Oh, great.
It's had a lot of things done, because when the house was moved here, it did not have inside bathroom.
Right.
It didn't have like a kitchen area. So all of that was added. When my mom and dad moved it here, they added a bathroom and added a kitchen area. And don't you know that was a big thing for them to have inside bathroom?
Well, of course.
And so through the years, there has been other things added to the house. My mom and dad, my mother passed away, and my dad moved to Walnut Ridge, and my husband and I bought the house.
Okay.
So it's still in the family.
And I should have asked, do you mind giving me your parents' names?
Oh, yes. My father's name was Harold. They called him Den Finley. And my mother's name was Lorene. Lorene. Her maiden name was Oaks.
Oaks. Okay.
And she married Finley.
And do you recall what year they moved the house here?
Yes, I think it was in 1954.
Okay.
I believe that was the time.
And had you come along by then?
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Yeah, okay. So I'm trying to remember what you said earlier about you were born in 91.
Yeah, I was
So
born
you
in
to
48.
Say, oh, yeah, you're
Yes.
Do you remember?
I remember living on the farm. I remember that was the happiest time of my life.
Yeah.
We had everything, I guess, that you would need. It was the orchard. My mom would, gather like peaches and apples, and there was blackberries. My dad took care of the cattle, and we had chickens and geese, just about everything out there, I guess, that we needed.
Orchard and mostly livestock then.
Yes.
That was the farm.
Yes,
Mhm.
that's
No
right.
row crops.
No,
I wouldn't think.
no,
Yeah.
just a garden.
Mm-hmm.
My parents had a garden every year, and
Yeah.
of course that was things that they would gather, the crop from the gardens,
Right.
the green beans and all those such as that. So
Sure.
so that was a happy time. My dad took care of these cattle. Were show cattle.
Oh.
And he would, take care of them. And every year he would go to show them at the fair, and then he would the county fair, and then he would either go to the state fair
Where was the state fair? Do you remember that?
in Little Rock.
Okay, all right. And so did he help transport the cattle to Little Rock?
Yes.
That would have been a big deal, yeah.
It was just really something really important. It made my dad feel so important, and of course the kids. We would all get to wash the cows down, He would let us, do that. And then we had it was like a brush that you could brush the cows, and you could make their hair real curly as you would break. So those were just things that we got to do when we were young that was really memorable.
Yeah, I'm assuming all of that would have been part of making them show cattle.
Oh, yes.
Getting them prepared.
Getting them prepared.
Now, did you go to the county fair?
I did not. We would get to go and see our dad because he would stay there. When the county fair was going on, he stayed at there with the cows at the fairgrounds.
Okay.
So we would get to go and see the cows, but we never did get to go to the state
To Little Rock. Yeah.
To Little Rock.
Yeah.
And-
That would have been quite a trip. And you mentioned siblings. How many siblings do you have?
Oh, I have 3 alive, but it was 4 of us.
Okay.
I had 1 sister and 2 brothers.
Okay.
My sister is deceased, but I still have 2 brothers.
And where were you in the order?
I guess maybe the middle. If there's 2 before me,
Okay. And 2 brothers or 2
now brother and sister.
brother and sister before you? Okay.
And then me and another brother.
And a
younger brother.
Okay. Just curious, did they stay in this area as they reached adulthood?
They did. My brother moved. My older brother moved to Jonesboro in his older years, because that was even after he had married. But now he's back here, living here, and me and him still live here.
Okay. Tell us more about what it was like growing up here. I mean, what are some of you just mentioned that as being some of your fondest memories. What other fond memories do you have, and what memories do you have that aren't so fond?
Well, I have a lot of good and bad memories, During the time when I grew up, it was during segregation time. And we had a certain area or a certain places that we could go and do. So I lived in the area that we're in right now. This was the area where the African Americans live. Black people lived on this street in this area, and that was because this was the area where I guess we had to live here, because we could not live in other areas of the town. So there were families. I would say on this street there were probably about 6 families, maybe more, or that lived in this area, and maybe a block over. And we all just kind of grew up together, and our parents and the kids, and this was an area where black people lived, but there were white people that lived here as well.
Okay.
Not on this street, but in this area. And of course, there were children that we all played together and visited together, but there was a certain point where you could play, outside, but when it come to going into their homes, there was kind of like a block. You had boundaries. You had boundaries.
Sure.
But like I say, growing up, when we moved here, and we only walked across the street, across the yard to this building, which was a school. This was the school and the church that most of your activities happened here. This was a hub for the black people.
Right.
You spiritually, you had church, you had dinners, you had Easter programs, just a place where we all came together, and also went to school.
And those must be part of the fond memories.
Those are the
Those
fond
social
memories.
activities and
The social activities, and even in the town, we could go, but there were certain areas you had to go in. Even like at the doctor's office, there was a area where there were colored at that time. Is what the sign would say. That's where the coloreds would sit. Or even if you had to go to the hospital, that was the same. Restaurants, there were places that only coloreds could sit. the bus station, the movie theater, everything, was just segregated. And at that time, we knew that. We knew what our boundaries were. Our parents made sure that we knew what our boundaries were.
Were there restaurants or other public places like that you could not go at all?
Yes, I say it was because we couldn't. You take like a, let's say a dairy bar, a Dairy Queen.
Mm-hmm.
You could not go in,
Mm-hmm.
but you could stay outside.
Mm-hmm.
If you would go up to the window and you would order what you wanted, but by no means could you go inside and get it or go inside to use the bathroom. That was your boundaries. You had to stay outside. So I would say yes, if you can't go in, that means you can't come.
Right.
You're not allowed. So, yeah. But in the theater, movie theater, there was, we could go inside, but there was an area where we could only sit. There were certain bathrooms that we had to use. So there were boundaries everywhere. There was, and that's something that our parents made sure that we knew. If we went against that, we would get in trouble.
Sure.
Lots of trouble.
Sure. And they were protecting you in doing so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When I talk about boundaries, we were young and we couldn't read. We didn't know if a sign, said colored only. But it's kind of like children now, if they saw when they're traveling and you see that arch that says McDonald's, they can't read it, but they know that arch.
Sure.
So that's kind of the way it was with us. We knew where our boundaries was, and even though we could not read the signs, we knew what we could do and what we couldn't do. And that is the part that, as I grew older, you realize that you are set aside, set apart. When you get up in the morning and you step outside your door, it's like a rejection.
Sure.
You can't go over here. You can't go there. You can't do this. But it was just a rejection, and you just felt like, at the time when you're young, you don't really realize that. But then as you grow older, you wonder why. Why is that?
Right.
Why can't I?
Right.
And so, and your parents made you remember that too.
Well, sure.
Because, and they made sure that we conducted ourselves in a manner where it would not cause a confusion or a problem, because, they would say, we have to live here.
Right. Right.
We have to work here. And if there's a problem, then we don't have jobs to have to take care of you all.
That leads to my next question. Where were a lot of the African American people who lived here? Where were they working?
Most of your women at the beginning, they worked in the fields, picking cotton. They picked cotton, chopped cotton, just whatever there was to do in the fields, which was mainly cotton.
How far away were cotton fields from downtown?
Ooh, probably out, I would say, maybe 3 miles.
Okay.
3 miles, or sometime they went to different towns, like a town by the name of Biggers, Arkansas, which would be like 11 or 12 miles north of Pocahontas. And then there was a town by the name of Fender, Walnut Ridge. Those towns, they would go wherever there was to pick cotton.
And the men?
And the men, they were started off in the fields as well. And then they began to get jobs like in the sawmill. We had a handle mill here that was called Sally's Handle Mill.
Right.
And a lot of the men worked there. That's where my dad worked years and years.
Working in the cotton fields for wages, they're just getting paychecks?
Yeah, they would get wages. And at that time, I'm not really sure about the amount that they were paid, but I know it was very little. Jan, do you remember how much the...
I remember getting 3 cents a pound.
Probably about 3, and I don't know if they ever got up to 5 cents a pound, but to me that's very small. But to them that was you know, that was a lot.
I assume there were no African American owned businesses in this county.
There was a black gentleman that had owned a car lot, you know, and he sold cars, but I don't think he had, for say, a storefront. They call it a storefront. He just had an area where he had his cars and he sold cars. But also, in the early years, there was a black gentleman in Biggers, Arkansas, that had thousands of land.
Right.
And he had employees, black employees that worked for him, and his name was C.C. Scott.
Did he run a ferry on one of the
Yes,
rivers?
he had a ferry. He built a church and a school. He was very, very wealthy. Kind of before his time, I would say.
Right.
But he came here from Alabama,
Okay.
I believe.
Was he still around when you?
No.
I didn't think so. I thought that was
No,
that was earlier.
He
right?
died in 1926.
Okay.
Yes.
But did when you were coming along, did you know about him?
No,
Okay. I was
did not.
curious to know if people talked about him
I did
because that would
not.
have been unusual.
but I did know about this car lot, the Smokey. His name was, they called him Smokey. His name was Elmer James, and they called him Smokey.
Yeah.
And he had a car lot and sold cars for many years and sold them to many, many people. People from around, even from Missouri, would come here and buy cars from him. Yes.
Was there a black funeral home in Pocahontas?
It was not,
Okay.
that I know of.
So if somebody in the African American community died, where was their funeral? Who did their funeral arrangements?
The local funeral home would be McNabb's
Okay.
Funeral Home. Here in Walnut Ridge, which is in Lawrence County, it would be Brian's Funeral Home, Hickenbotham. I remember Hickenbotham Funeral Home. Those were the ones, and they were white.
They were white owned, but they did both races.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Going back to, you were asking where the men, where they worked. Yeah. We had a black shoe shine guy that I can remember when I was very young. He shined shoes, and he retired there, as far as I know. And it's the barbershop is still in working. You know, it's still open. What's the name? Okay Barbershop.
Yeah.
Okay Barbershop was the name of it, and the black man that worked there was named Mabel Johnson.
Okay.
And we have his shoe shine stand here in the museum now. Some of the business people, after he retired, they stored it away, and they contacted me and said, we got something that you need to have in your museum. So,
Any relation?
well, yes, distant. Distant.
Okay. were church services and activities a big part of your family's life?
Yes, it was.
And
Yes.
that's at St. Mary's Chapel, which,
Well, no, my family were Church of Christ.
okay. Where
Oh.
was that church?
Well, it started out in the rural area, out in Burdell,
Okay,
out from M. Bowden.
okay.
And then as people moved, it migrated here. We had a church that was built. Pyburn Street Church of Christ built a church for the blacks here in Pocahontas.
Mm-hmm.
So we attended church there, but before that, we had church here in this building.
Okay,
The Church of Christ hired a preacher that would come in on the weekends and preach, and we attended church here along with, in between, St. Mary's AM&E Church.
okay,
They did not have church per se like every Sunday. It was
Okay.
like the second Sunday.
okay.
We had church here when St. Mary's depleted, when they did not have church here anymore.
Okay, so, but at some point, two different congregations were using the same building
Yes.
for a while?
Yes.
Okay. St. Mary's and the Church of
Yes,
Christ?
that's
Okay.
exactly right.
Okay.
That's right.
And was church a big part of family life or social life?
Yes, it was.
Mhm.
It was. Everyone that I can remember attended church somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
even at Biggers. You know, there was a church in Biggers, Baptist Church, Walnut Ridge. There was the Baptist Church that some of the black families would go to.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
All church services were segregated, I assume,
exactly.
everywhere.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, they were.
Yeah, outside of church, were there other activities that brought the community together? And were there any activities that brought the both races together?
Yes, yes.
Can you talk
yes,
about
it
that a little
was. Yes. I remember my mother and father talking about dances that they would have. Like they would have like barn dances.
Mhm.
They would play music. They would play like the guitar,
Mhm.
the violin, harmonica.
Uh-huh.
They would play those, and they would come together, and they would have dances and activities in that way.
Uh-huh.
And of course, the kids would be there, but the kids would play, and you know. But then they would have ball games too.
Mm-hmm.
They had ball games that they would play together. It would be black and whites would play together also.
Even the barn dances were.
Some of the barn
Were
dances, they
integrated
would, yes.
Really?
They had friends that would come to their barn dances.
And were any of the African Americans musicians? Did any of them participate from that standpoint?
Well, I think they were, but they were kind of like private. They couldn't, they would play amongst themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there were times where they would go out and play for businesses or thing. I'm not sure about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know that that was the time that they would get together, and even in their homes, they would all meet at their homes and have gatherings, have dinner and have music and visit. Our parents would visit. So yes, there were many times they would get together.
Do you believe the experiences you had growing up in this area are similar to that of other African Americans in the area, or even in the broader area? In the eastern part of the Ozarks, if you will.
I don't quite understand what you're...
Do you think the way you grew up here was similar to the way African Americans were growing up in counties around here?
I think basically, it was the same. It was probably just more. When you get out from a small town, you have more people and more activities. Uh, I think it was. I really don't know how to answer that because, like in some areas, it was like you were not accepted in some towns, in some areas. Like and you knew what towns those were. They were called, sundown.
I was going to ask you if there were
Towns.
sundown towns that you knew about.
Yes, yes. Yeah, there were sundowns, and that goes back again to being young and not understanding and not being able to read, but your parents, they let you know what area was basically sundown, and a certain time you best not be in that area, even going through those towns. I can remember when I was young and I did not really know why we did this at the time. My father's family lived in West Plains, Missouri.
Okay.
And like every other week, we would go visit my dad's brother and his family. And we would go, we lived at 5 Mile Springs, and that was Highway 90. Highway 90, you went through the back way to go to West Plains. And I don't know the names of the highways, but we went through the back roads to get to West Plains because we was avoiding a sundown town that my parents knew.
Sure.
But we didn't know. We were going somewhere. We were excited about going. We didn't really know that we were going, taking the back streets and
Right.
why.
Right.
But then as we got older, we learned why that was. So our parents were always on the lookout for the family, for the children, to keep us safe.
Of course.
And to go through safe towns and go to
Right.
safe places.
Right.
So, yeah, so did everybody live the same? Everybody had the same, I don't know, as you say, laws or
Restrictions.
Restrictions, that's good.
Yeah.
Everybody basically had the same restrictions, I
Right.
think,
Yep.
until the law changed.
That's so interesting you mentioned West Plains, because I'm curious to know, was it different in West Plains than it would have been in Pocahontas, for instance?
Well, I don't think it was different because I spent a lot of time in West Plains in the summer. I'd get to go there and stay with my aunt during the summer, and that was a fun time. And it was still the same rules, You lived in a certain area where my aunt and uncle lived. There was the area where the black people lived.
Yep.
In that area. And we knew where we could go and where we couldn't go. And so I think it was basically the same restrictions everywhere up until the law changed.
Sure.
So I think that's...
And were you, as a child, you've sort of touched on this, but as a child, were you consciously aware that there were things you couldn't do that the white children could do? And places you couldn't go that the white children could go? Were you consciously aware of that?
Yes, but we didn't really know the real extent of it.
Sure.
I'll tell a story about once me and it's two of my black friends, we were playing, and we had some little white girls that we were playing with. They were our friends, and so they decided that we'd go to the Dairy Queen to get an ice cream cone. Do you want to go get some ice cream? Well, sure, So we went to the Dairy Queen, and I say Dairy Queen, it wasn't Dairy Queen. It was like a dairy bar.
Yeah. Probably independently owned.
Yes. And we went there, and of course we was just having a good time, and when we got there, our friends opened the door and went in. We went right in behind her. And I thought that owner would have a fit. I mean, he came immediately and said, "You get out of here. You know you cannot come in here. Go stand outside." And that's when I think about that, I think how terrible that was.
Yeah.
But at that time, our mind was on ice cream.
How old do you think you would have been at the time?
I think we was probably about 10, 9 or 10.
Okay.
Because we were pretty good size.
So is that the earliest memory you have of being told you can't be in here?
No, I remember once before when I was with my mom. I went to a doctor, once, and I had surgery. I had I don't really know what that was I had, but I had some kind of a growth that was on my neck, and it was removed. And when we left, we had to go to the drugstore to get medicine, and my mom didn't have the money, and she asked if she could pay when she got paid. And I remember that time when the pharmacist said, no, you don't have the money, you can't get the medicine. I remember that.
Yeah.
Some of the things that you remember is things that has kind of been in the back of your mind, and you've forgotten about it until somebody asks.
Yes.
But I remember that time, and my mom was so sad, and
Certainly.
and I remember that part. But really, going back to the ice cream, we stood outside, and they handed us the ice cream, through the window. And of course, we all left, with our ice cream, but we couldn't go in, at that time to get ice cream.
They could take your money, but they couldn't take you in.
Yeah.
Randolph, moving in a different direction, Randolph County is as close to the Mississippi Delta as it is to the heart of the Ozarks. Do you see the influence of Delta culture in this area as much or even more than Ozark culture and traditions, especially among African Americans? Or
More in the Delta?
yeah,
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah. That is kind of something that I always felt like we were not part of the Ozark.
you mentioned that to me before. That's
Yeah.
why I asked the question, right?
Now everybody may not feel that way, but that's the way I felt. I always felt like, well, I'm not part of Ozarks because, those are places where you're really not welcome. African American people are not welcome in some parts of the Ozarks.
Right.
And so when you're not included, you just do not feel like you're part of. And so the Delta, yes, I feel a part of that, and I think it's because maybe there are more African Americans in the Delta.
Sure.
And so you always, and I really don't, I think I said this to Jan, and I said it to Lauren, you really don't realize how it feels to never see anybody that look like you. And when you're raised up, there's only one way. You don't see anybody that look like you that are in important positions. are in offices. And so that's the kind of the way it is with the Ozarks that I feel, you know. When you say Ozark and when you say folk art, I just think of people playing the banjo and playing violins and they're white. And I just never felt like I was part of it, of the Ozarks.
Yeah.
You know, even though I'm in the Ozarks, I just never felt a part of it.
That's a very good way to express it. Yeah. And that's largely a racial thing, because it doesn't matter if you're geographically in the Ozarks if you don't feel a part of it from the standpoint of culture, ethnicity, race, all of that, then you really don't feel a part of it. Is that correct?
That's true. That's true. And I'm quite sure there's many, many things that we all could be a part of and could be together. But,
Right.
you know, I think that goes back to the upbringing, where you started, and it just kind of has just continued to go on, and I'd like to see that changed.
Speaking of race, were there other races in the area when you were young? Native American, American Indians, any other ethnic groups that you remember when you were coming along? Or was it simply Caucasian and African American?
When I came along, you know, when you're set apart, you're not really going to know a lot about another group unless they're in your area. So as far as seeing, you know, other maybe I don't remember. I don't
Okay.
remember seeing. Not when I was young, but as I got older, you know.
Sure.
But when I was young, it was basically just black and white that I can remember.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Were there I don't know how you say biracial or mixed race? I'm sure it was. I know it was. Yeah.
We're talking today at the place where the Pocahontas Colored School was located, and where you attended school
I did.
through the 8th grade. Is that correct?
Yes.
Talk to us about the school and Miss Eddie Mae Herron, the beloved teacher for whom the center and museum are named. Just your impressions, first impressions.
Well, that is the part that I'm, you know, my heart is just really in it. I never thought, as when I was growing up, that I would have the experiences that I have now about the school, about Miss Eddie Mae. She's always been important to me. Miss Eddie Mae came here at a time I feel like our parents needed her. She brought to them things that they were not exposed to or didn't know. She was a young lady that came, and she came here to teach. She came to Biggers first. When she first came to Pocahontas, she taught in Biggers, Arkansas, and she taught there for 2 years. Then the school was closed down in Biggers, and I'm not sure exactly what the years, but it was in the 40s, the 1940s. The school was closed down, and then she came to Pocahontas, and the children that was going to school there then came also. She came here to this building. At the time that she came, the St. Mary's AME church was in full blown. It was, and Henry Taylor was the preacher, one of the preachers, and he had trustees and so now at the time there was not a place for the African American children to attend school. So the church struck up a contract, and Jan, I don't need your help on a contract with the public school.
Right.
To have this housed as the elementary school.
Right. Officially.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And it was segregated, of course.
Right.
And so this is how she started teaching here, through the public school.
Right.
We had the same principal, same superintendent, school board as the public school did. We were under the same, school rules. We just couldn't be in the same school.
Right. Not in the same building. Yeah.
Same
And
building.
Teacher.
Yes.
And so she was teaching 1st through 8th grade.
1st through 8th grade. That's right.
And
In
I'm
one
sure,
room.
Sure that took a lot of talent during the day to get that all done.
I would think so, but she seemed to me, of course, when you're young, she seemed to me that she had everything taken care of. Was pretty, had it under control. She was a disciplinary, but we knew she loved us too. It was love in with the discipline.
Sure.
And of course, she had the backs of our parents as well.
Sure.
They backed her, whatever her. So she started teaching here and taught from 1st grade to 8th grade. The public school provided, starting off, they provided school desks, and they also provided school books. But now some of the books, they were not all new books.
Right.
They were books as the public school would get new books. We would get the books that they had.
That's typical.
Yeah.
Right.
And they would, but Miss Eddie Mae took those things, those tools, and made them work for us.
Sure.
And there was never a time when she talked against the public school. We never heard that. It was that everything that we had here, she took it, she used it, and she taught. And I feel like she done a really good job.
Obviously.
With teaching 8 grades in a one-room school. We had many activities here. She was real talented in having activities. She taught us how to have plays and how to invent different things that we didn't have. I remember once she had us to make we called it a television. It was our TV. And she had it butcher paper. We had, some of the children were real talented. We had one girl that was a great artist. She was young and she could just draw. And so the book that we were going to be demonstrating on a television was The Cow Jumped Over the Moon. And the girl drew the book, all the pictures that was in the book. She drew this on butcher paper, and Miss Eddie Mae had them to make a system where you could roll it.
Yes.
And as you would roll this screen through, it had the book, the whole book on it.
Yeah.
we thought that was fantastic. That was our own television that she had invented for us, you know. And so things like that, she took them and she made them work and taught us. And even when we first started going to school here, and sometimes I get real excited, so when I get excited, I get loud.
That's great.
When we first started, you know, we had to bring our lunch to school. But then the school started delivering lunches here to us. And when they started bringing our lunches from the school, the public school, she took that time to teach the girls how to set the table, how to serve, taught the boys how to go and help bring the food in. She had a teaching to everything that was done here. It was so it was also life skills as well as so she was very important to all of us.
Every opportunity to teach you.
Yes, she did, and she was just a very important person to the
Well,
black community.
I have been told that she was very important to you personally, that she may have had some participation in naming you or how you got your name.
Oh yeah.
Do you mind telling us about that?
Well, sure. Like I was saying, I was born in '48, and Miss Eddie Mae was here, and she was teaching, and she taught also my older brother and sister. And so when I was born, Miss Eddie Mae was teaching about Louis Pasteur. And she came to see me when I was born, and she asked my mom if she could name me. And of course, you know, back then I think parents just let people name you just whatever and whenever. But anyway, my mom said yeah, and she said I would like to give her a name from Louis Pasteur. And as you know, it's the first part of his name was it was Pasteur, and my mother's name was Lorene, so my name is Pasteurine. So it came from Louis Pasteur, and Lorene is how I got my name. And as I was growing older, getting big, you know, kids made fun of it. You know, they made fun of my name. They couldn't pronounce it. They couldn't spell it right. So I just didn't like my name. I just didn't like it at all. But the years that I have passed and got older, it's a wonderful name. I'm proud of it, but I still don't carry it.
When do you remember what age you were when you decided Pat was going to be your name?
Well, it was always my parents.
They
My
called you
parents
Pat?
called me, yeah,
Okay,
Pat and
okay.
Patsy.
Okay.
And I don't know, it was just short.
Yeah.
But
That's fascinating that your mother was okay with Eddie Mae Herron naming you.
well, that's how special Miss Eddie Mae was to
Yeah.
all of us.
Yeah.
You know, she was a good friend to my parents.
Sure.
And she just thought that I guess I should have that name.
Sure. Sure.
But you know, now to this day, I can be in New York or wherever, and someone call me Pasteurine. I know they were part of my childhood.
Absolutely.
So that was how I got my name, Pasteurine.
That's a wonderful story.
But I'm Pat. I have carried Pat. Everybody knows me as Pat. Miss Eddie Mae also, when she came here, like I was saying, she was a big part of the community. Our parents came along also at the time where they did not get very much education.
Sure.
They had to work.
Sure.
Just when they started going to school, it was time to stop and go work in the fields.
Of course.
And so our parents were not educated. So she held night classes here in this building also for our parents. And that was something that was very special to them. Also was special to us because I can remember before my mother passed away, she could read, and before she could not. So I was always proud of that too. It was like they were going to school the same time we were going at night.
That's interesting. What was the school system providing that, or were they just paying her?
No,
or,
no,
or was
that
she just
was-
volunteering?
That was a volunteer thing for Miss Eddie Mae. I don't even know if the school knew,
That's
that
amazing.
she was
Yeah,
doing it, but
yeah, that's
she
quite
would
admirable.
she would do that at night for our parents, and she would even have like our little books that like the first graders.
Mm-hmm.
She would have those books, and she would teach them with the materials that we
Sure.
had.
Yeah.
And I can remember that so well. My parents were so excited about going
Of
to
course.
night school.
Of course.
That was really something special. Like I was saying, Miss Eddie Mae made do with whatever she had.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have just the regular school
Sure.
materials and studies.
Right.
And every morning, that was something that we had to learn. We learned the Pledge of Allegiance, and we would also have she would call it exercise, where we would get ready for learning. She would have us, we would sing and jog in our seats, and but we would say the Pledge of Allegiance, and we did not have a flag. That wasn't furnished, but Miss Eddie Mae had a picture of George Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And this picture she had put it up over the blackboard.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have to get up, and she would teach us how we had to hold our hands over our hearts, how we would say the Pledge of Allegiance to George Washington. Now, we didn't understand that.
Yeah.
I'm sure she did. But she wanted her main focus was to teach us the respect that we should have and how we were to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Even though, as the older that we grew up, and we learned that to us, those words were empty words.
Sure.
I say empty. They really didn't mean, those words were not for black people,
Right.
or for the African Americans.
Right.
When you say that now, it still registers in your mind, justice for all. So, but
do
Miss Eddie
do
Mae,
you think Miss Eddie Mae Herron knew that they weren't
I think she
fulfilled
did.
either?
I think so.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know she did.
Sure.
But it was kind of like our parents. You do what you have to do, to stay safe, to do.
Meet expectations of the community. I'm sure. I'm sure that's part of what she was doing.
Yes. So many things, things like that is, even though that that's not a part of you, not a part for you,
Mm-hmm.
You still go along
Mm-hmm.
to get along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yes, Miss Eddie Mae was, I just can't say enough good about her. I just hate so badly that she was not able to be here to get all of the glory that,
Yeah, sure.
she's been
Sure.
getting. But she also, along with Miss Eddie Mae, when she taught 1st through 8th grades, and if you think about being in a school where you got a teacher for the 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, it really, when you go to thinking about it, she had to be very talented. She had to be smart. She had to be well I don't know, control, I don't know the words to say, but she had a lot that she had to endure and
Sure.
that she could. But whenever the schools closed, when this segregated school closed, and I think about this so many times, she was allowed to work at the public school
Right.
for a year.
Mm-hmm.
But what was so sad about that is that they didn't feel like she had the right, she didn't have the knowledge, and she didn't have the proper certificates or to teach in a classroom there. So when you go back and you think about, well, she could teach those black kids from 1 through 8, but she can't come here and teach our children because
Right.
she's not knowledgeable enough.
Right.
That hurts,
Of
you know.
course. Of
That
course.
really hurts. But again, you know, she taught, she stayed there for a year, and I remember her saying, and she was beginning to get ill. She was sick. She had health problems. And I can remember her saying that it's just, I can't take that. It's
Yeah.
just, it's too stressful for me. So I'm going to be moving, you know.
Yeah.
And I can remember that was just so hard. I just couldn't believe that she was, you know, leaving us, you know, going to another town.
That
So
must have been tough.
yeah, so that was, but she's a great lady for us. And I know a lot of people say she just couldn't have been that good, you know, because you know, I've talked so highly, and I think every student that attended school here can say the same things or even more things than I say, because she was special to us.
Sure.